and then give me a 3, 2, 1. Okay, hi everybody, this is Mark Vogt. Welcome to the ChicagoLand SharePoint Users Group October session. I'm your host, Mark Vogt, with MTech Consulting, and we've got a guest presenter, the ever-entertaining Michael Blumenthal. We've got a lot of stuff to cover today. I'm going to be talking even faster than normal. We're going to jump right in. Today's agenda, a lot like the typical session, understanding SharePoint's purpose, talking about recent news and upcoming events. Mike's going to cover highlights of Ignite 2017. Got some really cool visions to come down off the mountain with. And then we're going to dive mostly into making sense of Microsoft's social media ecosystem. We're going to apply a little technique called right mapping that we've developed here at MTech. Behind the scenes, you're going to see it, but ultimately we're going to take a look at the strengths and weaknesses of a lot of these different technologies and try to understand where they could fit, where they should fit inside your different organizations. Lastly, we've got the BYOP. Starting off with the big picture stuff, I want to remind everybody that SharePoint is an integration technology. This is a slide many of you have seen before. It's just a review. Remember that collaboration is all about interacting with people. SharePoint is really good at driving that kind of interaction, that kind of integration in order to generate synergies, which is really the core of collaboration itself, is developing that synergy where you accomplish goals. Just showing that slide. Another one that I want to look at again, because this is going to be critical in evaluating a lot of the technologies we talk about today, is that there are 4 stages of collaboration maturity. This is a model that we've developed here at MTech. It starts off with communicating, moves up to sharing, moves up even further to tasking, and then into tracking. And we're going to use that criteria, we're going to use that criteria later on as a sort of lens, a scorecard, if you will, of understanding all of these different technologies and where they fit. Diving next into news and events and keeping things on your radar. In the news for September and October, last month we actually celebrated our 1-year anniversary of hosting the ChicagoLand SharePoint Users Group. Our members, when we first inherited, was 168 people and dwindling. It was going down. Today we have over 273 members, and we're actually averaging 1 new member a day in the month of October. That's how fast it's actually starting to grow. We've hit some kind of critical mass, and it's thanks to the additional people that have been presenting with us, Michael, RC, even Jay, and to the members and the interactions. Thanks, you guys. Also, last year's initial attendance in a physical environment was 1 to 2 people, very dismal. Useful, yes. Dismal, yeah, it's that too. Going virtual, we're now averaging around 18 people in a session. Today is a little bit less than that, but very, very typical. We had 18 RSVPs. This is a big improvement, but it's a sign that the people are taking this group more and more seriously and becoming involved. Looking at the rest of September, we saw that in September, Microsoft unveiled SharePoint 2019 at Ignite. Hopefully Mike will have a little bit to say about that. If not, we've got a link that actually points to it. We can expect it to come out in mid-2018 is when we're going to start seeing some of the first, at least the first previews for 2019. In October, we've got the latest SharePoint security updates, cumulative updates, and PUs available as well, and there's a link that shows up. Events coming around the area include September, we had Ignite, just to give you a background to where it was. It was in Orlando. October, we've got SharePoint Saturday coming up in Redmond, Washington, if anybody wants to go on a road trip. I'm not sure if we're having a SharePoint Saturday here in the Chicagoland suburbs area.
Mark?
Mike?
So my understanding is, yes, we will be having a SharePoint Saturday in November. November 18th is the last that I've heard. So it's the same team that organizes the suburban one. It'll be downtown this time. So we had the suburban one in the spring. They'll do a downtown one November, I think it's 18th, and then I would expect a suburban one in the spring of 2018.
All right, sounds fantastic. Mike, thanks for that ad. Also in November is SP TechCon in Washington, D.C., an increasingly well-attended event. In fact, we actually are going to be raffling off a ticket to the attendees here, a free pass. I think it's either a free one-day pass, or I think it might be actually all 4 days for the price of 3. There's something good about it, and we'll be announcing that at the very end of today's session. Then finally in December, we've got the also ever-increasing SharePoint Fest right here in Chicago, December 5th and 8th. I want to keep you guys abreast about that because that's an easy one to get to, which means there's no excuses for not going there and getting up to speed on things going on in SharePoint.
Yeah.
Mike, over to you.
Before we leave SharePoint Fest, the first night of SharePoint Fest, December 5th, my Office 365 Adoption User Group meeting, user group will have a meeting at SharePoint Fest. So SharePoint Fest is a paid conference, but you can come to the user group meeting for free, and it's going to be a panel discussion featuring some of the speakers from SharePoint Fest. We've got, I think, 3 of the speakers locked in so far.
Oh, fantastic. All right, switching over to the next slide, Mike. It's all about Ignite 2017 and Office 365 highlights. I'm going to change you over to be the presenter.
Okay.
And controls are yours.
Thank you. Let me share my screen here. And then can everybody see Microsoft Ignite 2017 in review?
Looks good.
Okay. So I had the pleasure of attending Microsoft Ignite at the end of September. It was held in Orlando, Florida at the Orange County Convention Center. And Microsoft Ignite 2017, Microsoft Ignite really is Microsoft's premier North American technical education conference. It is both an opportunity for them to provide technical education to a large group, about 22,000 users of their technology and thought leaders of their technology, as well as lay out their company vision of where they are going in the next year. And I think it's really important to start from that company vision as a way of framing the news and announcements that came out of the event. So if we look at the company vision, and this is something that's really is driven by Satya Nadella, the CEO, and the Microsoft's company vision, you can remember once upon a time it was a computer on every desk. Now it is empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. And what's interesting for us is how they plan to do that. And it's really a threefold approach. There's reinventing productivity and business process. There's creating more personal computing. And there's building the intelligent cloud. And if we look at what those things entail, on the reinventing productivity and business process side, there were a number of things that they announced about Office 365, including SharePoint announcements, but also a coming together of 3 graphs. And I'll talk more about those in a little bit. There's another piece of productivity, which was something they announced called Windows 10 Autopilot, as well as they laid out a roadmap for Azure Active Directory. And I want to bring those up because there's a deployment story there which is important in terms of getting Windows 10 and Office 2016 onto people's laptops, especially new higher laptops for replacement laptops, really making that deployment story a lot easier for IT. So I think that's worth recognizing as well. And then on the creating more personal computing side, of course, there's Windows 10, but also their investments in augmented reality and mixed reality and virtual reality as yet another way to extend user experiences. And then building the intelligent cloud. Well, we think of Microsoft's intelligent cloud as Azure, but their investment isn't just building more and more and more Azure, although they're doing that, but they're investing in democratizing artificial intelligence. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes here, and also making some investments in quantum computing. Although those are the time horizon for that's definitely spread over a longer time horizon. Well, let's drill into Office 365. So there were a huge number of announcements that they made for Office 365, and some of the big ones are things like OneDrive for Business Files on Demand. and Files on Demand is going to come out at the same as part of the Windows 10 fall update. And if you've worked with Office with OneDrive for Business, you know you have the ability to selectively sync and choose which folders to sync. Well, the problem with which folders to sync is that if you choose not to sync a folder, then when you're looking at the contents on your local machine, you only see what you've chosen to sync. You don't know what else is up there in your OneDrive in the cloud. And Files on Demand is intended to solve that by letting you see all your files, but not actually taking up all the storage space required for all those files. So it brings back stubs or placeholders, but in a new, better way, so that you can see all your files and pick which ones of them are actually stored locally, and for the remainder, you just have a little stub there showing that you can pull it down when you need it.
That is huge.
Yes, yes, it's a huge usability improvement. Another big change is the announcement of hub sites, and this is tied into an architectural direction for SharePoint, which is I think very much of interest to this group, which is that Microsoft does not want people using subsites anymore. So when you have a site collection, you would build out subsites to have a hierarchy of sites as a way of an organization mechanism. Well, hub sites give us another way to bring together multiple sites into a departmental site, into an intranet. Hub sites are a grouping mechanism that is really metadata based or association based, where you say, okay, this site is part of this sub-site. Sorry, let me rephrase that. This site is part of this hub site, and so if you've got that's your way to that's the new way to create, say, a departmental portal, or bring sites together in a group, and what that gets away from is it gets away from subsites, so you end up with every site being a site collection, which has, I think, performance and scalability benefits, and also reorganization benefits. I mean, if you need to move a site from one hub site to another hub site, it is just a simple change. It's not but if you have to move a sub site from one site collection to another, or promote a sub-site into its own site collection, you always have to use a third-party tool for that, and that was a big hassle. So hub sites give us a new tool for building out intranets, and a very important one at that.
So a hub site's more or less a logical link that you can go and mix and match and reorganize as you see fit, without having to pay the price of physically moving a sub-site underneath another sub-site. You know, all the agony you just described with sub-sites.
Exactly, exactly. And then, as Mark mentioned earlier, they announced that there will be the next on-premise release of SharePoint Server will be SharePoint Server 2019, along with Office Desktop 2019. And of course, so that reaffirms their commitment to continued on-premise releases. They recognize that not everyone can go entirely to the cloud, that hybrid isn't necessarily just a stepping stone. In some cases, hybrid is a steady state for many organizations, and so they're continuing to take the best of their cloud software as a service offerings and package them for on-premise use. And then, okay, moving on to the next big announcement was Skype and Teams, that Skype is going to be merged into Teams, and so Skype, the product, or I should say Skype for Business, the product, will go away with all its functionality merged into Teams. Skype, the brand, will probably still exist with like, so for example, you might make a Skype call with your coworkers in Teams. And let's see, oh, the other thing is
is here to stay then, isn't it?
Say it again?
That sounds like Teams is here to stay, that's a permanent part of Microsoft's vision.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, it's not just a Slack competitor anymore. Now it's a unified chat-based workspace with rich collaboration and communication capabilities that we will be seeing more and more of. And interestingly enough, in some ways, it becomes a new front end to SharePoint, and for organizations who may have had poor deployments of SharePoint in the past, where SharePoint might have a bad reputation. Teams is in some ways a way to get around that, because you'll still have all the file sharing capabilities of SharePoint, but now you can say you're deploying Teams instead of SharePoint, and so you don't have any brand baggage from SharePoint, but you still can offer all the same capabilities, plus the Teams capabilities.
I'll actually be talking about that more later on in my own slides as well. That's a great segue, Mike.
Yeah, and then another announcement about update cadence is that Windows and Office will so Windows Update and Office deferred channel updates will now happen on the same cadence. So twice a year, every 6 months, basically spring and fall. Current channel Office will still happen monthly, but this way Windows and Office updates can be done in lockstep. And then another thing they announced was something called Bing for Business, where if you're using Bing to do your regular web searches, it can make use of the fact that it recognizes your Office 365 work identity and surface work content into your search results as well. So those were the big announcements. There's a number of small changes as well. They announced a new way to do sharing with external users, where you don't have to have your external users don't have to have a Microsoft Personal or a Microsoft Business or really Office 365 account. That there'll be a way to use one-time codes to share files and sites with anyone with an email address. They announced across Windows and OneDrive file previews supporting over 250 file types. You'll be able to use OneDrive to sync rights management protected libraries. The web parts for modern pages. You're going to get more web parts in a bigger toolbox. All the apps will, all the mobile apps will get updates. People card updates include LinkedIn. We'll talk about including LinkedIn data from their LinkedIn acquisition. They talked about some site provisioning updates. PowerApps coming to SharePoint as a way to do new list forms. That's been sort of heralded for a while. That's going to actually land before the end of the year. Simple things like our list views used to be defaulting of 30 per page and paging and paging and paging, and now the default in the modern pages is going to be endless scrolling instead.
Cool.
There's admin improvements. There's a new SharePoint Admin Center coming. That's actually in preview, and you can sign up for that preview if you want to. But the preview is still pretty early, where it's sort of a minimum viable product at this point, where there's a lot of admin functionality that they haven't implemented in the new user experience yet, but it's getting there, and they're improving it constantly. Another piece they announced was self-service OneDrive for Business, restore as far back as 30 days. So if a user is synced all their files to their laptop gets attacked by ransomware, they can just roll back to a previous point in time for their OneDrive for Business and recover from that ransomware attack.
Okay. I think so. The big takeaway.
And there may be other use case scenarios for that, but enabling end users to recover from ransomware attack without having to have IT be involved was considered a win. So I mentioned in here the people card updates, which is part of we're starting to see some benefits of their investment, of their purchase of LinkedIn. And one of the things that they talked about, and we're starting to see in the People Card update, is really the coming together of not just one graph, but really 3 graphs. So if you are all in on the Microsoft stack and not only use Office and Azure Active Directory, which really here falls under Microsoft 365, and I'm going to assume almost everyone on this call and most people at most companies use LinkedIn in some fashion, at least in IT.
Sure.
And if you use their dynamic CRM or other back-end line of business solutions, they're really looking at ways they can integrate these 3 graphs together to provide more powerful solutions and better user experiences. So if you think about that, that's combining. They're looking at what can we do based on these networks of data we have. All the information about what you do when you're using Office products in your daily work life, plus all the things we know about the people you're working with, plus any sales data you have if you use, for example, dynamic CRM. How can we bring those things together to make you more productive? So I think it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out, and People Cards are just the beginning of that.
Especially if you're connected the way you just described. We were already deriving benefit from just the Microsoft, graph itself the last year and a half, and the ways that all that data was intertwined and then accessible through the graph very, very easily.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that we realize how big a change that is. I mean, not that long ago, we would just use Office products, and none of those signals were captured. None of the products really talked to each other other than copy and paste or embedded files. But none of the activity that we were doing in our Office activities did anything. And now it does, and it just, of course it does.
And now we're becoming aware of it because we've got the tools telling us that. A perfect example is you're working on a spreadsheet, you're working on a Microsoft Word document, a statement of work, and suddenly Word tells you that your colleague Chris is also working on the same document. Right there, you're suddenly going into a co-edit experience you would never have known about if you didn't have that level of intertwining of the applications.
Absolutely.
All right.
So there's another piece that also relates to Office 365 and Office Desktop deployment, and it's this thing called Windows Autopilot. So today, when a new employee gets a new computer, or when you have to replace a computer that broke for an employee, IT usually does this imaging process where they take the computer, they procure the computer, they take the computer, they set it up, and so forth, and then eventually they give it to the employee. Windows Autopilot is this idea that an employee can go to the electronic store of their choice, buy their own hardware, a laptop or a tablet of their choice, turn it on, sign into a particular Microsoft website with their work credentials, with their Office 365 account, and that will kick off an imaging process, bringing down Office and whatever other work applications are necessary. And within, say, 2 hours of them starting that, they will have a fully functional work computer. And so it really is designed to enable a better bring your own device scenario, lessen pain for IT, and when you combine that with the idea that Azure Active Directory is going to become more capable, and eventually any of the kinds of configuration management things you might do through, say, group policy in on-premise Active Directory, you'll now be able to do through Azure Active Directory or Intune. You can imagine a future where organizations don't need to have domain controllers on premise anymore.
That's actually a cool vision. It makes me wonder what the play is for onboarding consultants and things like that as well. But that will people that already have an established laptop, but they just want to get it righteous in the eyes of their new employer, as opposed to being lobotomized and then reloaded with stuff. But let's shelf that for another day. That topic.
Yep. Yeah. No, that's a great question. And then going back to making investments in more personal computing, as well as making the cloud more intelligent. They talked about the virtual reality and augmented and mixed reality investments that they're going to make. And again, virtual reality is an immersive experience where you can't see the world around you. Augmented and mixed reality is where it's a mix of both virtual things and real life that you see. And they're announcing, I think, a new headsets made with partners that work with Windows 10 and deliver augmented and mixed reality. But also with their artificial intelligence capabilities, obviously they're continuing to invest heavily in artificial intelligence. But part of their mission here is to democratize it, to make these artificial intelligence capabilities available to everyone. And that's how they see they're going to create value with AI, is making these things accessible. So not only do they create these impressive AI capabilities, but they expose them via APIs, so literally anyone can just call them and use them. And again, they touted their cognitive services as examples of that. And the fact that now a power user can use a tool like Flow to watch for tweets. When tweets match a particular criteria, they can send that tweet over to cognitive services to identify the sentiment and then take action on that. And that kind of artificial intelligence, power users being able to tap into that is really something new.
My head is just spinning from that, Mike.
Yes. Yes. So I mean, it's work, and because of how readily accessible AI tools are, we will see AI continue to flow into more and more places, and not just speech processing, not just image processing, just everywhere you can imagine. And then finally, looking farther into the future, the Microsoft is investing in quantum computing, and quantum computing is two things. One is it's massively parallel, and it is freaking weird. So from a traditional computing background, the fundamental unit of computing is the bit. A bit is either on or off. In quantum computing, it's no longer binary. Things can be on and off at the same time. So trying to wrap your head around that, it's just very difficult because it's so antithetical to our traditional notions of computing. But what you can do with quantum is you can do things in massively parallel. You can do massively parallel computing, and so because of the parallel nature of it, you can get really transformative levels of computation done.
Yeah.
Where things that would take hours or years become minutes and seconds kinds of things. But this is definitely in its infancy, and so it will definitely be a much longer horizon before we see practical applications of this. But Microsoft has started investing in this area today. And so that's why I felt it was key to understand their overall vision, to understand where a lot of these things play within that vision.
Very cool.
I do have a little bit of my own experience at Ignite that I can share with you all. It was a 5-day conference with a full day of pre-conference activity or learning sessions as well. I'm a Microsoft MVP focused on Office 365. They had a special a special day-long session for us on that Sunday, where they basically previewed all the announcements and made sure that we were understood and were aware of all of them. On Monday was Satya Nadella's keynote, and I've talked you through the main points of that. On Tuesday, I conducted a version of my Office 365 adoption user group meeting at Microsoft Ignite, so I spent a good portion of Monday preparing for that, as well as teaching the AV guys at the conference how to, all about the Microsoft Surface Hub, because there was one in our room and the AV guys really didn't know what it was or what it could do. And then I didn't attend that many sessions, but I did spend a fair amount of time in the expo hall checking up on some of my favorite vendors, as well as many of those vendors had social events each evening. So there were networking events or parties hosted by Nintex, Metalogix, the AvePoint, and VA Insight, and a number of the other ShareGate, a number of the other ISVs we're familiar with. And then one of the other things I did was I spent a fair amount of time in several focus groups, and I like these because it gives me a chance to make sure that our voices are being heard by Microsoft when it comes to feedback on such things as PowerApps and Flow, Office desktop deployment, and the upcoming capabilities in SharePoint around conditional access as well. And for those of you not familiar with conditional access, it's the ability to put in place rules about what devices are able to access a site collection. So whether it's coming from a particular IP address or other rules, potentially making sure that devices are patched to a certain level before they can access the site. Things like that. And there were other announcements about geolocation of SharePoint content and OneDrive content that I forgot to mention earlier. And so that's I'll mention that now, which is that if your organization spans the globe and you've got different data sovereignty requirements, so if you've got, say, a group of people in Ireland and a group of people in the United States, you can make sure that the people in Ireland, their OneDrive or SharePoint data is homed in a European data center, whereas the United States users, their data is homed in a United States data center.
Is that for performance then?
It's not for performance. It's for regulatory compliance.
Gotcha. Okay.
And just got a quick picture of my user group session. We had 50 people attend my user group session. Overall, it's a lot easier to get people to attend a meeting when they're already there when a lot more people are already there for a bigger meeting. And then I'll also share one other thing, so that at Microsoft Ignite, the Thursday night of the conference, they have what they call the attendee celebration. And what they did for Microsoft Ignite was they rented out Universal Studios. And the company I work for, there were three other people went to the conference with me, but they were from different areas. One or two of them were focused on data warehousing and SQL and business analytics and so forth. Another guy was focused on desktop. And so I didn't actually see them because the conference was that big. I didn't actually run into either of them until Thursday night at the attendee party. So I finally met up with my coworkers, and we went to Universal Studios, their Jurassic Park area, and got a picture taken with one of the animatronic dinosaurs there, who felt like it was about to bite my ear or possibly my head off. But then So a ton of stuff to digest over the course of the 5 days, and for me, some of the next steps are still I haven't gone through all the brochures and vendor information that I picked up, and I mean there's just there were a ton of vendors talking about every aspect of Office 365, digital workplace, SharePoint, and other things you didn't even think to know about, like Active Directory security and Active Directory backup, which as an Office 365 person you wouldn't necessarily think of, except that of course Active Directory is being synchronized with Azure Active Directory, and that's what drives Office 365. So it was a good, roaming the exhibit hall was a good way to get awareness of these related concerns that you might not have otherwise thought of. The other thing is that not only did Satya lay out his vision for Microsoft in the Ignite keynote, but he also put it in a book. And so on bookstores now and in Amazon now, you can buy this book called Hit Refresh, and by Satya and two other authors, and it really lays out not just the vision for Microsoft that he's created and working on, but also his sort of position on IT's role in society and how to create opportunities for everyone. And I got a complimentary ebook copy of that as an MVP. I finished reading that book earlier over the last weekend, and it's really quite good. I'd recommend it to you if you have a chance to pick it up. And then I just want to review and summarize and say again, this is where Microsoft is going, at least over the next year. A lot of the things that were announced should actually hit our Office 365 tenants by the end of this year, except for, of course, the things that I said were going to come in 2018, like SharePoint 2019. And I think, yeah, we'll start seeing previews mid-2018. I think it's supposed to actually hit release by end of 2018. But overall, again, the investment areas, Office 365 to reinvent productivity and business process, making use of not just the Microsoft graph, but the LinkedIn graph and the Dynamics graph, Windows 10 Autopilot and Active Directory Futures, again, helping IT business process, more personal computing, both through different kinds of reality and bringing more intelligent experiences into the things we do every day, and then investing heavily in AI and quantum computing to continue to grow their cloud capabilities. So that's the news from Ignite. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Mike. Time well spent. Lots to be excited about in the next year with Microsoft. That's easy to see. I'm going to switch back over and continue presenting. We're going to dive into talking about Microsoft social media technology, and I'm going to squeeze 40 slides into 20 minutes.
Sorry.
No, Mike, no, not sorry at all. This is a fantastic. Everybody, I think, was very engaged in what you had to talk about from Ignite, especially if we didn't get to go. Well, I was hanging on every word, and for me, the idea that Microsoft finally found a way to create little stubs, little shortcuts, and completely eliminate the need to do synchronizing, that is a huge, huge step for me. I use 2 different work laptops all the time. I've got something like 80 SharePoint libraries synced on any given day. But that means I have to replicate all that data down onto each of those 2 laptops, which is a pain in the keister. I don't want to have to do that. The idea of stubbing it out, little links instead that give you access to everything, searchability to everything, that's a phenomenal step for me. So that was quite the gold nugget. Diving in, talking about Microsoft social media, the ecosystem itself, and understanding it, we need to start by understanding, well, what's social media? Let's take a step back. Social media is group-mediated technologies, the stuff that we're familiar with, texting, email, forums, discussion, chat, conferencing, but it's all got to serve some kind of a purpose. By the way, computer-mediated communication is any kind of communication that occurs through the use of 2 or more electronic devices, just to keep that definition complete. I'm going to throw a couple of voteisms at you right now. What's the purpose of social media? I'll go out on a limb and say purposeless communication and sharing, that's the definition of socializing. But when it's purposeful communication and sharing, that's part and parcel of what we call collaboration. It's all towards some kind of a goal. Put another way, purposeless social media is socializing, but purposeless social media, is actually collaboration, and that's a purposeful relationship in order to achieve some kind of shared or overlapping objectives. Collaborating then achieves the goals that are not easily accomplished alone. I mentioned earlier we want to take a look at the slide because it's going to be part of our best tool for trying to understand the value of each of the new technologies. We remembered there were 4 stages of collaboration maturity. Communicating first, then sharing, tasking and tracking. Those are the gold standards. That's what we're striving towards. The value then of social media technologies comes in collaboration because they actually help these stages that we look at then help us evaluate both the technologies and the vendors, because we can ask the question, how well do they help me? How well do they empower me in communicating, in sharing, in tasking, in tracking? And what we're going to see is a very surprising phenomena, a very surprising pattern in all of the technologies with the exception of 2 today. More big picture stuff. Taking a step back, there's 2 major types of collaboration. If you had to break it up, there's structured collaboration and there's unstructured collaboration. Structured collaboration breaks up into 2 different pieces. Process-focused or process-centric collaboration, business processes, doing payroll, submitting your timesheets, all that kind of stuff. It happens over and over again. It's not any different. The values that you use, the little itty-bitty steps might change, the values, but not the process itself. The other one is project collaboration, and lots of us are in the business of project collaboration. We live and die as IT consulting firms by having large projects. It's structured collaboration. The relative quantities of these types of collaboration will determine which of the social media technologies actually will either empower your organization or hinder it. And it's also that nature, the makeup in your organization, Abir and Brian and Craig and Dan and Jay and Jocelyn and RC, it's going to determine what value you perceive in all these different social media technologies. So if you hear me starting to sound a little bit bewildered about some of these technologies, it's because I'm looking at things through the eye of MTech, where we're very structured collaboration, process and more project-centric. What we have to try to do as we understand the ecosystem is start with all of this, all these different terms, whether they're Microsoft or its competitors, all the different kinds of technologies, and figure out a way to actually make sense out of all of it. One way to do that is by starting with Gartner. Gartner tries to get all of this stuff into the buckets. I'll speak candidly, I don't think they get it right, but they do consider collaboration technologies to involve unified communications, web conferencing, and 2 more different magic squares, two more different markets. What I show here is that in these steps of collaboration maturity, communicating, sharing, tasking, and tracking, unified communications really is only addressing that first step. And here we see that Microsoft continues to be a leader, Cisco even more so, because hey, there's a hardware element to all of this, so naturally they're going to be leading the way of unified communications. In the area of web conferencing, we can say that in web conferencing there's communicating and sharing, which puts Cisco and Microsoft still out there, but it also gives Citrix and a few other competitors a chance to come in. 2 more markets, sorry for all the bells in the background. 2 more markets is the content collaboration platforms market, where really when you see the definition that they use, they're really talking about stuff that has to do with communication and sharing. And again, now you start to see some interesting things. Microsoft seems to take a backseat to technologies like Box and even Dropbox. Google suddenly finds its way up there, and you're left wondering, what's this all about? It has to do with content collaboration being defined by Gartner, and again, in a slightly different way than we expect. Lastly, we've got enterprise agile planning tools, which I want you guys to start thinking as being part and parcel about genuine collaboration. All 4 aspects of it really are being addressed here. And surprisingly, we see Microsoft actually going toe-to-toe with a completely different set of vendors like Atlassian, the makers of JIRA. Why? Because those guys really do understand what it means to actually collaborate and do so in a web-based environment. Why did they do that? Because guys, they went to school off of Microsoft and they went to school off of SharePoint. There's just no way about it. When you look at the JIRA interface, that becomes very apparent. Gartner's definition of collaboration that gave rise to that slightly interesting quadrant, or magic square quadrant, is that they call collaboration only team workspace, folders, cooperative editing, change tracking, and comments on files and conversations, but not necessarily talking about tasks, not talking about assignments. That's where I think there's actually a disconnect that needs to be addressed. Once you start off with all those terms that I threw up on the previous slide and try to organize them, this is what you actually start to see. In the world of collaboration, a $50 billion a year market, you really have that breakup into hardware and into software. We're not going to deal about the hardware side of it because it really ends up down here with Citrix. Instead, we end up with the software side of it. And if you say that all the software has to map to one of those or more of those 4 major processes or steps of collaboration maturity, communicating, sharing, tasking, and tracking, what you start to see is that the vast majority of technologies, whether they're from Microsoft, from Google, or from any of the other competitors, are all only really chasing the first 2 steps of collaboration maturity. They're still in the communicating stage, they're still in the sharing stage, fighting it out tooth and nail for that market share, probably because the content itself is valuable to them. So they want access to the content because, hey, they're going to look at it. And from it, they're going to actually develop different kinds of insights on the people that are sharing stuff. But what we need to pay attention to, guys, is the tasking and the tracking, and look at who's addressing that. Because in the world of collaborating, if you're not aligning toward a common set of goals, and you're managing and defining and assigning and tracking all the tasks and everything else that's associated with trying to achieve those goals, you're not really maturely collaborating. Are you collaborating? Yes. Are you maturely collaborating? No. And then we start to see that there's really only two main competitors. It's Microsoft, the huge behemoth at $80 billion a year, and you've got little Atlassian that's about $600 million a year. Those are the only 2 entities that are actually have technologies that address all 4 of these steps of collaboration, including the tasking and the tracking. That's a very interesting takeaway, and it means that's where we should be paying attention and why we should be interested in Microsoft's side of the equation, or of the technology. I'll just look at this slide. This is the process that I use to try to identify what tools should fit where. We call it right mapping. It's a combination of right fitting the technologies and their strengths, road mapping out where the gaps and the overlaps are, or the mismatches are, ultimately arrive at what we call right mapping. And I misspelled it. Sorry, everybody. I'll skip the slide. We're going to start diving into individual technologies, and we're going to look at them with an eye on all of that, always keeping in the corner here our eye on what we're trying to accomplish, technologies that empower all 4 of those stages of collaboration. Diving into Microsoft's SharePoint team sites, been around for 17 years. They're the easy-to-use websites with the metaphor of rooms. They're also the things that everybody hates, or at least lots of people hate. The strengths are they're familiar, they've been around for 17 plus years, they empower all 4 stages of mature collaboration. They're scalable, extensible, indexable, and templatable, meaning once you capture how to do a particular kind of a project into a team site, you can replicate that team site like a cookie cutter. And that's a huge thing in a company like ours that's very project-centric, to be able to embed knowledge, information, wisdom about experience about how to do a particular kind of upgrade or a migration or a deployment, and simply cast it as a template in a project site and then repeat that project site. That's powerful. Weaknesses that SharePoint team sites have: it's the first of the web-based UIs, and because of that, it hasn't changed or improved really in 17 years. Its unforgiving structural hierarchy makes common admin very painful, although Mike addressed the hub sites as a step to try to address that. Microsoft historically and consistently refuses to fix any of the flaws. Instead, they go off and start introducing all kinds of new technology, new ideas, new UIs, new UXs, but they don't fix what's broken in SharePoint, and if they did, they would utterly transform the way people adopt it. I'll stand on that with my dying breath. Let's go into a little demo and see what that looks like. I'm going to switch my shared screens. Let's see, stop sharing screen. And I'm going to show a different screen here. Give me a second. We're going into monitor 1. Can somebody confirm whether or not you can see the new screen? Anybody?
We see Google.
All right, I'm just going to go into one of our project sites that we use. Let's say Griffith DMS. Here's an example of a Microsoft SharePoint team site used to do structured collaboration. So you're really tackling all of those 4 steps of mature collaboration. And as soon as it loads, you guys have seen this in the past. I won't spend a lot of time on it. But what it is here is that you're allowing for people to communicate only through discussions and threads, things like that, but not very chatty, and certainly not in real time, because you're expecting the people that you're working with might be on the other side of the ocean and they're not working the same hours. But you see that it's a very list heavy, it's a very text heavy, but it's also a very unambiguous what needs to be done, who needs to be doing it, and whether or not there's different kinds of problems. So you're tracking deliverables that are a part of any, I don't care if it's a software development project or if you're working on the corporate picnic. You still are going to have some kind of goals, some kind of deliverables. You're going to have some kind of risks, issues, questions, tasks that get assigned to people, possibly changes in defects if it makes sense to do so, and you're going to be storing and tracking all different kinds of documents. In a SharePoint team site, all of that is possible. In fact, they're heavy on who's doing what and being able to track and use the site as if it's a dashboard, as if it's a report to report to your customers, the people that you answer to that are paying you to do all of this collaborating. You're being able to communicate it in a very meaningful way. Plus, I can turn this into a template and use it as many times as I want. That's a very powerful feature. We're all familiar with it. Let's jump back in and look at the slides again. Tell me when I'm back into the regular slides, please.
You're back.
12:52, like I'm not going fast enough. Some of the weaknesses we already talked about. We saw a demo. The roadmap is made up of good news and bad news. One, it's on the good side, it's going nowhere. The bad news is it's going nowhere. The next generation users coming into the job market refuse to even look at this chat-listless user interface and user experience. That's what's got to be fixed. And if Microsoft doesn't, it's poised to actually throw away that entire collaboration market and give it to people that are actually addressing that particular need, being able to embed real-time chat into your SharePoint team sites. That's my prediction. Next one we're going to look up is Microsoft. Yeah.
So doesn't Teams address that?
Let's take a look. We're getting right into it. Great segue. In fact, it kind of segues into where we're heading with this. I'm not going to spend as much time as I normally would on Skype because I think it's a familiar tool for everybody. Most organizations are probably using Skype. It's an easy-to-use chatting, small group conferencing. It's popular. It's cross-domain compatible, meaning that I can have customers that are chatting me literally while I've been presenting today. I have customers that are using Skype to chat me saying, hey, what's the URL to be able to get into the presentation today? And I'm chatting right back even while Mike is doing his presentation. Powerful tool. We use it day in and day out. It is integrated to a point with SharePoint. That's one of its strengths. But its weaknesses, it's a bandwidth hog. It's got what can only be called a buggy code base. You open up too many windows and you never know what's going to happen. And there's 2 different versions of it. The UI there's Skype for the desktop and there's Skype Personal, whatever you want to call it, and it's a completely different beast. They got to do something about it. The roadmap is it's going to be continuing, but it's going to be embedded into hip new technologies. That's the hint that Michael was making. It's going to go into Teams. It's going to be a part of Teams, and then people are going to say, "What's Skype?" a year from now. Hold on one second, please. Oh, let me take a look. There seems like there's a question. Where does automation fit into your model? What's the big pitch for me here at AT&T rather than social aspects of collaboration with SharePoint? Let's talk about that when we get to the discussion slide, if we make it there. I'm being very realistic, guys. We might just get only one more slide here, and then we're going to pick the rest of this up at the next month's session, and that's probably the best we can do because I'm only on slide 21 out of 41. So what I need from you guys, in fact, we're going to pause right here. I want to actually make Teams the beginning of our very next session because there's a lot to talk about it because it hit on something that even Mike hit on something that is where Microsoft's trying to go. They're using Teams as kind of a new skin to handle what SharePoint is, and I think that's very much on the right track, and there's so much to talk about. So what I am going to do is actually skip all the way to the very last slide and talk about the winner. What I need from everybody here, we have a randomly selected person from today's attendance. We've got 8 people. Edie or Erica, did you guys randomly, hermetically select somebody from the list today that's going to receive a free pass to SP TechCon in Washington, D.C.? Edie? Oh, it's Jolian Tyser. You have to turn your mic on, Jolian, and tell us how to pronounce your name, please. Come on, turn that microphone on. Let's hear your voice.
Okay, there we go. You pronounced it correctly, Jolian Tyser.
Jolian, congratulations. You get a pass to go to SP TechCon, which means it's just the price of the hotel stay and the travel, but you get to go to SP TechCon for free. Please give your address, your email address, to edie.burrell@mtechinc.com. She's going to connect with you in the next day or two. Send the pass to you. If you decide that you want to forego it, then back on our Meetup site, we're going to open up the Meetup site to see if there's anybody that actually wants that free pass. Does that sound useful to everybody?
Great, thank you.
All right. I wanted to get into a discussion. Craig, I'm going to ask that we're going to keep the transcript. We're going to shelf that. And now we know what we're going to be picking up at the November meeting. Instead of the November session being all about deeper dives into Ignite and lessons learned on communication and PowerApps, we're going to pick up the rest of this evaluation because I think there's some very important lessons, some very important insights, rather, that we need to discuss about where these technologies fit, where they're going, what kind of organizations each of you live inside, so that you can help make decisions in your organizations on which technology should fit where. And that's probably a pretty good ending point for today. Thanks, everybody. Our next session is going to be November 15th, 2017. That's a week ahead of Thanksgiving, so there should be plenty of time for us to attend all of this. Please let everybody know. And thanks for attending today. Mike, thanks as ever for your contribution. It was wonderful listening to what you had to say about Ignite.
Thank you. See you all next month.
See you all next month, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hey, Mark, are you still there?
Yeah, I am.
Oh, there are a few questions.
We can try to address them while we're still recording.
Okay. Let's see. Do you want me just to read them?
I can see one of them. Yeah, read it out loud. It'll be a part of the recording.
Sure. It says, where does automation fit into your model? That's the big pitch for me here at AT&T, rather than the social aspects of collaboration with SharePoint.
Was that from Craig?
Yes.
Craig, what's your vision for automation? Is it automation that the tools themselves are performing the collaboration, or the tools are automatically empowering various kinds of collaboration?
Well,
what's on your mind?
Yeah, I mean, for us here, talking about collaboration doesn't really get a lot of attention, and so I've switched to discussing SharePoint in terms of automation, primarily around workflow, and trying to show teams how to automate their business processes. And it just seemed like that concept didn't really show up in the Gartner squares or in that model that you were showing.
It's kind of, Gartner doesn't always address the topics that really need to be addressed. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah.
Yeah. You wonder what's going on in their mind when they talk about collaboration platforms. Like, who cares about that? What we care about is where's the talk about tasking and tracking, or for you, where's the talk about actually business process automation via workflows, whether it's SharePoint Designer workflows or whether it's Microsoft Flow. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have Flow or any O365 stuff yet, but yeah, workflow primarily. But automation, you know, at heart is what I use to sell SharePoint internally.
Do you see an interest in wanting to talk more about workflow at a high level? Maybe not how to do little things, but workflow at a higher level for automating business process using Microsoft Designer workflows? I do have some insights gained from lots of experience here. The first and foremost is being, don't try to automate your entire business process. that's almost always self-defeating. But automate it where it makes sense to automate the business process, so that now your workflows are working in symphony with the actual people that are enjoying the benefits of the automation without feeling threatened by it. Instead, you've got a bunch of little robots that are all helping to get work done in a meaningful, easy to manage, extensible manner. And that certainly is one insight. But that could be an entire open discussion for either a November or a December session. What do you think?
Oh, I'd like that, yeah.
I'm putting it down. But if I'm going to do that, you're going to be contributing in the December session. Are you up for that?
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic. December BPA via workflow. What was the other question that we had here?
The next question was from Brian Jones. He said, I'm the director of IT for a school that has been using Teams for the last year and wants to incorporate more Office 365 SharePoint into our Teams deployment. And then Brian did mention that he's looking forward to our next meeting where we'll be discussing that in more detail.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, so we've been using Teams here for the last school year and are slowly but surely rolling stuff out. And Microsoft's making huge changes on a weekly basis, it seems. And so I'd like to start using Teams, Office SharePoint in the team environment to push out, like departmental intranets and so forth.
So what would be some additional topics? If we get done with I'm getting a little bit of an echo. If we get done with the rest of my slides early next week with, say, 15 or 20 minutes at the very end to dive deeper into Teams, what kind of topics would you want to see addressed in the Teams? Is it more how-tos? Is it more visionary?
I guess more of how can I incorporate some apps for the teachers, such as, for instance, here's one that I'm working on right now in how can teachers submit print jobs to the copy room en masse instead of emailing them like they have been in the past.
That sounds like a fantastic BYOP. So we're going to have our first real bring your own problem brainstorming session next month. We're going to put aside the last 15 minutes to brainstorm how to address particular topics like that and see what other people have to contribute. Does that sound like
This is Michael. I'm still on the call, and I just want to say that kind of problem lends itself really well to SharePoint. And so you in the team channel, you've got all those tabs at the top, and you can have a tab that connects to a SharePoint site. In a SharePoint site, you can have a library. You can customize and configure lists and libraries, and that's part of the big value of SharePoint. And you could have, say, a library where teachers would drop their documents in and then specify as part of the metadata for those documents how many copies, what color paper, and so forth, and have a status column as well, so when the print center finishes, they mark it as done. I mean, there's
yeah, that's what I was envisioning.
Yeah, I mean, stuff like that is a beautiful use case.
where that library literally becomes
It
an
also ties back into the productivity discussion, the business process automation.
Yeah.
Right.
A library
Yeah,
becomes a box. You can even put stuff there and come back to it.
Yeah, because right now we just have Teams in a classroom environment, but I want to expand that and have it, school-wide, so that we can have a, a faculty team, and that's where we have a faculty intranet where stuff like this is posted and make easy use of that.
Yeah. I think one key discussion area is when should Teams not be the front end to the user experience?
And now you guys are taking away some of my slides for next month.
Well, I mean, it's an open question. I think I'm not going to try to answer that here. I'll leave that to next month, but I think that's definitely one of the questions.
Yeah, it's what's on everybody's, especially when you got SharePoint tantalizingly hiding underneath the hood. It's like, when does Teams make sense to expose as the UI into SharePoint? when does it make sense to try to segue and embed functionality into SharePoint and change that user interface, that user experience. Stay tuned for those slides next month. Hey everybody, thanks for staying on this much longer. We're going to have to stop the recording now though, because nobody likes watching, hour and 6-minute long videos later on.
Sounds good.
We'll see you all next month on November 15th. Brian, watch for an email from me on Meetup or mark.vote@mtechinc.com. You and I need to get connected to try to make that 15 minutes as valuable as possible next month, okay?
Sounds good, Mark.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.